Maternal and infant death rates in the United States have fallen dramatically in the wake of legalized birth control. Freed of the shackles of perpetual childbearing, American women have progressed socially and economically. The major argument against birth control was that such information would encourage immorality. Reverend John Dietrich of the First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis said, "The evils resulting from knowledge can never equal the evils of ignorance."
We bid you welcome. We do not ask what you believe or expect you to think a certain way, but only that you try to live a kindly, helpful life with the dignity proper to a human being. Welcome all who believe that religion is wider than any sect and deeper than any set of opinions. Welcome all who might find in our friendship strength and encouragement for daily living. Good morning and welcome to the Universalist Unitarian Church of Farmington. Thank you for spending your Sunday morning with us, whether enjoying the service in person or watching online. My name is Ellen Greenya, and I've been a member at UUCF for 4 years. This morning, we are fortunate to have member speaker Paul Bailey with us today. Paul is a longtime member of UUCF who enjoys giving presentations about famous UUs and other important historical figures. I'd like to extend a special welcome to any visitors today. After the service, we invite you to stay for coffee and conversation downstairs in our reception hall. Religious education classes are being held in the RE classrooms during the service. An usher can direct you to those locations if needed. Joys and sorrows will be shared later in the service. You can come to the microphone or text the phone number listed on page 2 of the order of service. Please take a moment now to silence your phones, but don't turn them off. You're encouraged to share on social media that you are attending today's service. Please join me in stating our mission, which can be found on the second page of the order of service. We seek answers everywhere, include everyone, live with compassion. And for announcements, I have one. The next Meet the Minister session will be on Sunday, July 23rd from 11:45 to 12:45. It will be held in the back of the meeting house or in the Marge Brown Room. If you have not yet attended one of these sessions, please join us. Please check the UUCF website or emails for other announcements about upcoming events, and it looks like we've got a couple here. Go ahead.
Good morning, Marie Laurie with Save the World today. After service, please join us in Adams Hall while you're in coffee hour or through coffee hour. We are writing letters to young women in Ohio today with Vote Forward, encouraging them to vote in August's special a referendum. The Ohio, for those of you who haven't heard, the Ohio legislature has introduced a bill requiring a 60% hurdle for any citizen-led initiative going forward in Ohio, which means that you could have 59% of the vote and still lose on that initiative. It's clearly undemocratic, it's clearly targeted at, and they've said that it's targeted at reproductive rights and voter rights, but it would have a horrifying and cascading effect throughout the country. So we're encouraging young women especially, because at this moment they have the most to lose, to vote in that election. It's easy, we have templates, we have pens, we have paper, we have everything you need. Please join us in letter writing. And then the second thing is next Sunday at 7 p.m., again in Adams Hall, we'll be watching I Am Not Your Negro, which is based on the last unfinished writings of James Baldwin, and it talks about the civil rights movement and its unfinished work today. So please join us for those things.
My name is Hope. I'm coming to you from membership today because if you have not heard, we are participating in the Farmington Founders Festival Parade on July 22nd. Please let Tom or I know if you would like to attend, just so we have a vague idea of who we're expecting. Anyone is welcome to walk in the parade, and anyone that would like to ride in the car instead of walk in the parade is also welcome. We still have spots available, so let us know. And if you can't come, but you want to help in some way, we are accepting candy donations, or you can bring candy with you on the day of. The other thing that I wanted to announce is save the date kind of thing for our picnic on September 10th. So our parade is July 22nd, and then a month and a half later, picnic September 10th. Thanks.
Yeah, just to amplify a couple things that Hope said. As far as we thought we had 2 cars filled with people to ride in the parade, then all of a sudden people had vacations and stuff. So we can really use a couple, 3 more people to ride with us. The vast majority of us are going to have our cool blue UU t-shirts on as we walk. You don't have to have them to walk, but we really look neat in those, don't we? So if you want to walk, you don't have a shirt, let us know. We can find one to lend you, something of that sort. And I think that's it.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Joan Daly. I wanted to invite, for those of you who did not get this announcement about free concerts in your email, the place where I live is, a lot of you might know, it used to be the old Botsford Commons. Now it's called Beaumont Commons, it's Corwell Health, et cetera, et cetera. But we have free concerts, and there's going to be this one Thursday evening, and it's if you take East 9 Mile Road, it stops at Orchard Lake and it becomes Folsom. You just follow that. It says no entry, but that's how we get in. It's just 2 blocks down, and it's out in the parking lot. Find a place, and if you are coming home from work, they're providing hot dog meals for $5. And there's a list, and I did find out this one, this coming Thursday, is called the Whatabouts. And this is what it is. They are performing all the big girl group songs from the 60s. So I mentioned that I was going to say it, and they were delighted to hear it. So, and also, they spray or something. We're not complaining about any mosquitoes. So try to make it.
Okay, hi, real quick. You may have seen this. We are participating in Chapters for Charity, which is offered by the Farmington Community Libraries. It's basically that you form groups of up to 5, read from a list of 5 books, and then on August 18th, there will be a trivia contest amongst all of the teams, and there's a $5 entrance fee for each person, and the total registration fee will be donated to the charity of the winning team's choice. So we already have 2 teams that have formed from here at UUCF. We can field as many as we want to, and just imagine all of us there, just crushing the competition on and trivia. Because I know there's a lot of trivia buffs out in this audience here. So anyway, if you're interested, see Tom Bjorklund or myself.
Thanks, everybody. Please rise as you are willing and able for our hymn from the Gray Hymnal, number 12-12. We are dancing Sarah's circle. We will sing all the verses.
Sarah's
From the early part of the 20th century to her death over 50 years later, Margaret Sanger began a movement, the full effects of which cannot be measured to this day. The right of a woman to plan her family through birth control is one of the most crucial ideas of the 20th century. Today, it is so accepted by society that it seems hard to believe that Margaret Sanger went to jail 9 times to win this right. Her crusade against almost insurmountable odds affected the very roots of life. Through birth control, Sanger saw the one hope of bringing reason and planning into family life so that men and women would have only the number of children they wanted when they wanted. No woman can call herself free until she can choose consciously whether she will or will not be a mother. It was a revolutionary idea. Unitarian minister Reverend John Dietrich said that the greatest opposition to birth control is the Catholic Church. Their position is that God sent children and all must be welcome no matter what conditions await them in the home. According to an article in Physical Culture magazine, April 1917, 300,000 babies under 1 year old die in the United States every year from poverty and neglect. The Catholic Church said they could still be used to populate heaven or hell according to whether or not the sacrament of baptism had been performed. Finally, in 1938, in a lawsuit brought by Sanger, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a decision permitting the mailing of birth control information, striking down the Comstock law. The American Medical Association then reversed its position and decided that doctors had the right to distribute birth control devices to their patients. For Sanger, a lifetime of effort had finally paid off. Birth control in America became a reality. The red-haired rebel raised the taboo subject of birth control from obscenity to dignity. Sanger lived long enough to savor the June 1965 decision in Griswold versus Connecticut, striking down a law declaring contraceptives to be criminal. Supreme Court Justice William O. Douglas, writing for the majority, said, "Here we are dealing with a right to privacy older than the Bill of Rights." Katharine Dexter McCormick was a driving force in nearly every crusade for women's rights. She funded much of the efforts to gain ratification for the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote, formation of the League of Women Voters, and the creation of Planned Parenthood. Katharine McCormick is a name that every woman today should know, because their lives would probably be very different today if it wasn't for her. She funded what the New York Times called the most sweeping socio-medical revolution in history, whose impact on the United States and other nations is almost too vast to analyze. She provided the funding for the research that discovered the birth control pill. McCormick graduated from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. It was co-educational, but could only provide housing to 50 female students. McCormick donated the money to build an all-female dormitory that would allow MIT to house 200 female students. Later, she donated funds to build another all-female dormitory to house another 100 female students, increasing the number of female undergraduates from 4% to over 40%. And she had all the furniture and appliances in those buildings. Katharine Dexter McCormick is the most generous individual benefactor in MIT's history. Her lifetime generosity to MIT exceeded $40 million. When Katharine McCormick died, she didn't even rate an obituary in the nation's leading newspapers. I'd like to thank the Sunday Services Committee for the opportunity to speak today. It is indeed an honor. Also, a special thank you to Reverend Karen for her help, and as always, a thank you to Diana for her help. Margaret Sanger was born September 11, 1879, in Corning, New York, the sixth of 11 children born to Ann Purcell and Michael Higgins. Her mother was a devout Roman Catholic, went through 18 pregnancies with 11 live births before dying of tuberculosis and cervical cancer. Her father was a stonecutter by trade, a rebel by nature, also an activist for women's suffrage and free public education. Margaret Sanger was named Humanist of the Year in 1957 by the American Humanist Association. She was selected one of Time magazine's 100 most important people of the 20th century, also one of Business Week's greatest innovators of the past 75 years. Sanger felt that in order for women to have a more equal footing in society and to have physically, mentally healthy lives, they needed to be able to decide when a pregnancy would be most convenient for them. Margaret was a free thinker like her father. She was a teacher for 1 year, then was called home to take care of her mother, who was dying from tuberculosis. Her mother had been severely weakened by having so many children, and within a few months, she died. Margaret entered the nursing program at White Plains Hospital and completed the 1-year program, then finished her training at the Manhattan Eye and Ear Clinic in New York City in 1900 at the age of 21. Shortly after graduating from nursing school, she married architect William Sanger. They had 3 children, Stuart, Grant, and Peggy. Margaret quit nursing to be a full-time mother. When Sanger returned to nursing, she worked as a visiting nurse in some of the worst slums in New York City. She helped to deliver babies or nurse desperately weak moms back to health. Some moms suffered from bearing too many children. Others nearly bled to death because of unsafe abortions. Most of these women had more than 10 children. They begged Margaret to tell them something to keep from having another baby. By law, Margaret was forbidden from teaching the knowledge they sought. Knowledge of the methods of controlling birth was accessible to the women of wealth, while working women were desperately kept in ignorance of this knowledge. The major argument against birth control was that such information would encourage immorality. Reverend John Dietrich of the First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis said, "The evils resulting from knowledge can never equal the evils of ignorance. We should educate the mass of people in the principle that birth control is essential to the welfare not only of both parents and children, but of the whole human race." Sanger became convinced that women had only sought the knowledge which was their right. She vowed to do something to change the destiny of these moms' miseries. She had found her cause and was ready to take on the world to fight for it. Women of the working class had emphatic views on the crime of bringing children into the world to die of hunger. They would rather risk their lives through abortion than give birth to little ones they could not feed or care for. Laws against imparting this knowledge forced these women into the hands of the filthiest midwives and quack abortionists, with the consequence that the deaths from abortions were almost wholly among working-class women. Many times Sanger was at the bedside of a woman in childbirth and saw the tears flow in gladness and heard the sigh of thank God when told that her child was born dead. Even if it were born alive, the chances are it would perish within 1 year. According to an article in Physical Culture magazine, April 1917, 300,000 babies under 1 year of age die in the United States every year from poverty and neglect. 20,000 women died from illegal abortions each year in the 20 states that reported such deaths. Most of these women had more than 10 children. No adult woman who is ignorant of the means to prevent conception can call herself free. Margaret quit nursing and traveled with her family to Europe to learn family planning techniques. She returned to New York in 1914, armed with knowledge and eager to pass it along to the moms of New York. When Sanger started her crusade in 1914, federal, state, and local laws were all against her. She was jailed 9 times. The medical profession was against her. All the churches were against her. She entered the fight alone, a frail young woman with no social or financial backing, nothing but conviction. Reverend John Dietrich, minister of the Unitarian Church, then in Spokane, Washington, supported Sanger in a 1915 sermon, The Right to be Well Born. In the sermon, he defended and recommended intelligent birth control. Sanger started her own magazine, The Woman Rebel, working with friends who volunteered and funding it through subscriptions paid in advance. She produced and mailed the first issue of The Woman Rebel in March 1914 from her small New York City apartment. The slogan was, "No gods and no masters." Also, she coined the term birth control. Under the Comstock Law, several issues of The Woman Rebel were banned by the Postal Service as obscene. The government charged Sanger with 9 counts of breaking obscenity laws, which carried a maximum of 45 years in prison. She was forced to flee to London for 2 years, leaving behind her children and husband. Her attorneys were then able to get the charges dropped. She returned to New York and resumed her fight. Now a little more about Katharine McCormick. She was born August 27, 1875 in Dexter, Michigan. In 1904, she became the second woman to graduate from MIT and the first with a science degree. Katharine met Sanger in 1917 and served on the committee of 100 prominent women to promote legalized birth control. She also served on the National Council of the American Birth Control League, founded by Sanger in 1921. Katharine McCormick smuggled diaphragms into the United States to supply Sanger's birth control clinics throughout the 1920s. She made frequent trips to her home outside Geneva, Switzerland. Carefully hidden inside her suitcases and trunks and sewn into her clothing were hundreds of illegal diaphragms on each trip. Katharine was on a first-name basis with customs officials who never checked her luggage. Now back to Sanger. She co-founded the National Birth Control League, now called the Planned Parenthood Federation of America, and began lecturing across the country and gathering supporters to aid her efforts. She decided she must challenge the law directly and opened a birth control clinic in New York City. The clinic proved popular, but within a few weeks, police conducted a raid and shut it down. The judge told her he was willing to dismiss the charges if she would agree to respect the law and close her clinic. She said, "I cannot respect the law as it stands today." She was sentenced to 30 days in a workhouse. Margaret reopened her clinic upon her release, but this time operated it out of her home. The clinic employed a female doctor, which was funded by an English contributor whom she had met while abroad. Sanger founded a lobbyist group in Washington, D.C. called the National Committee and set up the Clinical Research Bureau of the American Birth Control League to invent cheaper and more effective means of birth control. She organized the first national and international birth control conferences in the world and wrote extensively on the subject, publishing 11 books and pamphlets through 1938. Margaret separated sex and reproduction. The creative instinct does not need to be expended entirely for the propagation of the race. She also discussed syphilis and gonorrhea and the ways in which venereal disease were a public health issue for women. The response was outrage. The New York Times labeled her an enemy of the young. Margaret said that women were denied the right to fulfill themselves as human beings because they were often pregnant and died early deaths on account of too many pregnancies or illegal abortions. Also, children suffered from being born into large poverty-stricken families. Sanger believed that a woman's body belongs to herself. It does not belong to the United States of America. Enforced motherhood is the most complete denial of a woman's right to life and liberty. Finally, in 1938, in a lawsuit brought by Sanger, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a decision permitting the mailing of birth control information, striking down the Comstock law. The American Medical Association then reversed its position and decided that doctors had the right to distribute birth control devices to their parents. The red-haired rebel raised the taboo subject of birth control from obscenity to dignity. She did more to free women than any other single individual. In the 1950s, when government and medical institutions and the pharmaceutical industry wanted nothing to do with contraceptive research, funding for the development of the birth control pill came from a single source, Katharine Dexter McCormick. McCormick's willingness to fund such a controversial project at a time when 30 states had laws on the books restricting the sale and use of contraceptives was a bold move. Katharine's knowledge of biology and endocrinology led her to believe that birth control in the form of a pill could become available for women. She wanted results and fast. She was determined to see an oral contraceptive in her lifetime. In 1953, Sanger took McCormick to a small lab on the outskirts of Worcester, Massachusetts. They met with a scientist Sanger thought capable of developing the pill. McCormick told Dr. Pincus she would like a tour of his labs. She also would like to review the resumes of your scientists. I would like to discuss a theoretical timetable if we agree to proceed with the project. Most important, Katharine said, I want to know how you feel about contraception, not just birth control generally, but how it particularly affects women. At the end of the meeting, Katharine wrote Dr. Pincus a check for $40,000. More would follow when procedures and details were worked out. McCormick asked Dr. John Rock to join the team to head the drug trials in Puerto Rico. Dr. Rock was a world-renowned gynecologist and Harvard professor of medicine emeritus. He was also a devoted Roman Catholic. Dr. Rock later wrote a book, The Time Has Come to Try to Convince the Church to Approve the Pill. In his book, he said, the authoritative Catholic doctrine of responsible parenthood was given great impetus in 1951 by the late Pope Pius XII when he affirmed that the obligation of husband and wife to bear children is subject to the rule of reason and moderation. The Catholic Marriage Manual says a couple would be justified in limiting family size if they cannot reasonably support more children. The pills prevent reproduction simply by modifying the time sequences in the body's own functions. The rhythm method sanctioned by the Church depends precisely on the secretion of progesterone from the ovaries, which action the pills merely duplicate. Therefore, the physiology underlying the spontaneous safe period is identical with that initiated by the steroid compounds. I feel, therefore, that when properly used for conception control, the pills serve as adjuncts to nature. Dr. Rock had no success convincing his church. The Pope said every act of conjugation must remain open to the transmission of life. Any conjugal act deliberately rendered sterile, he wrote, is intrinsically dishonest. Katharine met with Doctors Pincus, Chang, Hoagland, and Rock at the Worcester Foundation. She peppered them with questions. She wanted detailed reports on lab results, clinical planning, and budgets. The doctors made many visits to McCormick's home office on Beacon Street. She had her secretary take notes in shorthand, and at the next meeting she was prepared. Katharine was an avid reader of scientific journals. McCormick donated more than $2 million, $20 million in today's dollars, to Dr. Pincus and his pioneering research on fertilization and hormones in the development of the contraceptive pill. Even after the pill was approved, she continued to provide funding into improving the pill. In 1993, The Economist magazine named the birth control pill one of the 7 wonders of the modern world. When the history of the 20th century is written, it may be seen as the first time when men and women were truly partners. Katharine McCormick is a name that every woman today should know, because your life probably would be very different today if it wasn't for her. She funded what the New York Times called the most sweeping socio-medical revolution in history, whose impact on the United States and other nations is almost too vast to analyze. When the pill came on the market in 1960, the scientists and doctors involved in the development were thrust into the national spotlight for their contribution to science. Katharine's remarkable contribution was soon forgotten. In spite of competing claims of paternity, there was no father of the pill. The credit for the pill's conception belongs to 2 women who stand by themselves as the indisputable mothers of the pill. One of them, Sanger, was already famous. The other, Katharine McCormick, didn't even rate an obituary in the nation's leading newspapers. Gloria Steinem said, Margaret Sanger and Katharine McCormick taught us to look at the world as if women mattered. Katharine McCormick died December 28, 1967, at the age of 92. She was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame in 1998 and the Michigan Women's Hall of Fame in 2000. At the crowning era of her life, Margaret Sanger had built a movement of 15 nations and territories: Australia, Ceylon, Great Britain, Holland, Hong Kong, India, Italy, Japan, Pakistan, Puerto Rico, Singapore, Sweden, Union of South Africa, the United States, and West Germany. The Unitarian Church was the first church to support Sanger, but not till 1930. The Universalist Church followed 1931. Sanger started in 1914. John Dietrich of the First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis supported Sanger in 1915. One doesn't hear about Margaret Sanger today because some link her with eugenics. Eugenics, the beliefs and practices aimed at improving the genetic quality of the human population, played a significant role in the history and culture of the U.S. prior to World War II. During the late 19th and early 20th century, eugenics was considered a method of preserving and improving the dominant groups in the population. It is now generally associated with racist elements. By 1910, there was a large and dynamic network of scientists, reformers, and professionals engaged in national eugenics projects and actively promoting eugenic legislation. Public acceptance in the U.S. was the reason eugenic legislation was passed. 5 presidents supported eugenics: William Howard Taft, Woodrow Wilson, Herbert Hoover, Calvin Coolidge, and Theodore Roosevelt. In 1927, the Supreme Court, in an 8-1 decision, upheld a state's rights to forcibly sterilize a person considered unfit to procreate. Virginia, Buck versus Bell. 31 states had compulsory sterilization. Sanger saw birth control as a means to prevent unwanted pregnancies from being born into disadvantaged life and incorporated the language of eugenics to advance the movement. Sanger also sought to discourage the reproduction of persons who, it was believed, would pass on mental disease or serious physical defects. She advocated sterilization in cases where the subject was unable to use birth control. Sanger rejected euthanasia. For her, it was individual women and not the state who should determine whether or not to have a child. Sanger understood unfit to indicate physical or mental defects. She wrote that if unfit refers to race or religions, then that is another matter which I frankly deplore. Margaret was convinced that racial regeneration, like individual regeneration, must come from within. That is, must be autonomous, self-directive, and not imposed from without. Sanger emphasized negative eugenics and sought to discourage parenthood for those who were too poor, too sick, or too unstable to adequately feed and clothe and shelter a child. She advised that anyone with a hereditary disease or defect should not risk having children. Eugenicists imply or insist that a woman's first duty is to the state. Sanger contended that her duty to herself is the first duty to the state. Margaret Sanger moved to Tucson, Arizona, and died there September 6, 1966, at age 87. Commenting on Sanger's death, the New York Times said, "The birth control movement grew out of one woman's outrage at the suffering she saw among the poor. It grew into a view of family planning accepted and practiced in a majority of American homes." The Times ended by calling her one of history's great rebels. Margaret Sanger was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame in 1981. Thank you very much.
A perfect heart is one that has known love and loss, joy and sorrow. The perfect heart is one that has been shared. As joys and sorrows of our community are shared, please direct your energy, prayers, and meditations as a gift of compassion and strength. That rest in the silent sanctuary of our hearts. One for the joys, one for the sorrows, and one for the strength of the gathered community that can support you and bring you peace. The offertory, A Greater Good for Ourselves and Our World by Kayla Parker. We know that our financial contributions to this congregation come from sacrifice and hard work. We are so grateful for this and commit together to ensure the funds we gather collectively do a greater good for ourselves and for our world than they could have done alone. May there be an offering to sustain and grow the life and mission of this congregation. May we give in hope and in love. Our offertory music is the song I Come From Women, written and performed by Reverend Amy Carroll Webb. It is a powerful song about the sacrifices and challenges the women before her made so she could live her life authentically. Please rise as you are willing and able for our hymn from the Gray Hymnal, number 170. We are a gentle, angry people. We will sing all 3 verses.
6.
Huh?
There's 6.
Well, we're going to sing all 6 verses.
Katharine McCormick was a driving force in the battle for the women's vote, the formation of the Women's League of Voters, the creation of Planned Parenthood, and the development of the birth control pill. She stepped forward when others were afraid to act, and her unflagging fidelity to the cause made possible the social, political, and scientific achievements that today mark the difference between misery and opportunity for millions of women. May it be so.